It's worth noting that this is going to be the world's longest tunnel, beating the prior one by just 200 meters, which I think is in the Alps as well, from memory.
100%. Someone got a nudge then. Just
Let's start in a slightly more complicated area so we could do a bit more tunneling, please. Welcome back to the Off-Site Podcast. I'm Jason Lancini, joined this week again, 2 weeks in a row, by co-host Sam Hanisch. And this week we are looking at Europe's most ambitious rail project that faces a 13-year connection limbo crisis. In Australia, Roberts Co. Victorian arm collapses, leaving billions in projects in limbo, and a legal victory in the US that has cost 3 times more than the win. All coming up. Sam, glad to have you back second week in a row. Although, if we're being completely honest, mate, it's the day after the prior recording. Or we could pretend. Let's pretend I'm in London. It's a week in the future. How's your week been since we last spoke?
Yeah, it's been a busy 24 hours. No, it's good to be back. Interesting topics. Yeah, good mix. I particularly like the last one, so looking forward to getting into it. Yeah,
awesome. Do you reckon you'll be up for a third day in a row?
A third day in a row? Absolutely not. No chance. It's Friday tomorrow for those playing at home. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely not. We won't do weather chats then, because the weather's the same as it was yesterday.
My weather's great. Yours no good? Same as yesterday.
Oh, I'm in London now, remember?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Do you know one of the benefits of being a 2-time co-host is you get to choose the intro music now? So after this, Ollie will ask you get to choose your favorite song. As long as it's got no copyright breach, you're in charge of intro music.
I don't know if you're shitting me. I've never listened to the podcast, so I don't know if you're shitting me.
So yeah, you should have that song ready. That would have been in the prep. No, it's not. One of the cool things was a few weeks ago, we talked about how both Carlos and I would use AI if we were in construction today, like back on the tools. And I got somewhere between 5 and 10 people message showing examples of what they were doing, like text message and stuff. And a couple of people asked to jump on phone calls. Everyone's heard about it in the news, and no one's using it in any practical way. So it was interesting. I think we might try and see if we can tap into that a bit more and show more practical examples. You're a big AI guy.
I think I classify myself as a bit of a Luddite, a bit late to these sorts of things, but it's great. It just blew me away. I think with everyone, the first time you use it, I think people's expectation to just completely get blown out of the water by what it can do. Mm-hmm. But you reckon people are late to it? I reckon there's lots of people in the background right now that are busily building amazing construction-based tools out of AI.
Oh, I think there's undoubtedly a crazy amount of apps and things that people are building. It's unclear, the ground is shifting so rapidly. You never know if you're sitting on the next best thing or something that becomes a feature of ChatGPT or something the next day.
Yeah.
But I think that folks that are on projects are still, largely just living in I see Microsoft has this Copilot thing that doesn't seem to get anything right whenever I ask it a question.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're way behind. They're behind. Yeah.
That's what. Yeah, that was the interesting. The people that reached out are all from on projects. They're like, oh shit, I didn't know it could do that. Show me how to do this, that, or the other. Because if your only experience with it is playing with ChatGPT once or twice, or using Microsoft's what did Mark Benioff call it? Modern day Clippy.
Savage burn.
I think there's a big eye opening that can happen to people in the industry.
I think someone's going to work out something very useful. There was that toolkit. I forgot the name of the product. It was a toolkit for an engineer, but I think there'll be something like that. That's sort of helper that's drawing down on AI and it's assisting you as an engineer, construction engineer, with all your menial tasks through the day. I reckon something like that will really take off. Someone can work out.
There's like this behavioral shift that you have to make. And one of the folks I spoke to after the episode was like blown away by what we looked at. And then the conversation was like, yeah, how do you know when you can use it, when you shouldn't use it, like in terms of what things it can do? Because you end up in this spot where you basically have to train yourself to be like, when I'm thinking about doing something, first go, can AI do it for me? You have to like flip to like from I solve the problem to can AI do it? And then I just have to kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And so that's probably like, I'd say that's the hardest shift to kind of make.
And you can see these construction companies going to have they're going to have a horrible time from a governance perspective navigating this, because the whole idea of them, like any sort of decision making by their engineering teams is just, for the amount of risk they carry, that it's unacceptable. Like the concept of AI punching out some calculation for some crane lift somewhere is just not it's not feasible to them. So
yeah, like in reality, it probably starts on the consumer side, where like maybe the Google AI summary and thing evolves enough that's actually useful and people chat back, and like you kind of like train a behavior a little bit from the consumer side that then comes in.
Yeah.
Because even no matter how good it is, I think there's just in the B2B space, it's like really hard to get behavioral change rolling. Anyway, that's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
Cool. So jumping into topic one, the European Union, France and Italy are building a 25 billion euro Lyon-Turin rail link. It's being dubbed as like Europe's most ambitious rail infrastructure project. The project itself is facing a critical timeline disconnect. The main tunnel, which is being built at the moment, could sit underutilized for an extended period of time because the connections on specifically the French side might be delayed. So Sam, your French will be better than mine. Do you have a crack first at pronouncing the tunnel? Mondambin base tunnel. Yep, we'll take that. So this is this world's longest railway tunnel. It's supposed to stretch 57.5 kilometers through the Alps and is due to be completed in 2032. The goal of the project is to transform freight and passenger transport between France and Italy, which currently has to go over a 150-year-old mountain crossing that requires triple locomotives to navigate up to 30-degree gradients, which I'm no train, but I struggle with 30-degree gradients. I'd imagine if I was hauling a whole bunch of freight or people going skiing or whatever, that I would struggle even more. At the moment, there are 7 tunnel boring machines that are currently cutting through 14 different types of ground conditions to create effectively 162 kilometers of tunnels when you include the both directions, the safety bypasses, and all the access shafts. But I think in the sort of breakdown that our team did in our recent offsite newsletter, they've broken down that effectively there's this disconnect where the tunnels are scheduled for completion in 2032. The French access routes might not be ready until 2045. And there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff in there about the history of the project, what's caused that, political elements, as with every piece of an infrastructure project. So Sam, there's a bunch of pieces to this that were interesting. There's like the engineering technical bit, there's like the overall infrastructure and the goal of it, and then there's, I guess, the politics that have led to this current state of play. Pick your poison. What jumped out to you?
I just like, there's a bunch of things, but the thing, just as you're doing the intro, is getting to the point now when you say, it's the world's longest tunnel. It's not really a flex, is it? It's like, oh shit, we have to spend the money to build the world's longest tunnel.
Yeah.
Just to get through this ridiculous mountain.
Also worth noting, because I think we talked about, there's always like the world's tallest building, and then they stick like a spike on the top to beat the previous one by like 200 millimeters. It's worth noting that this is going to be the world's longest tunnel, beating the prior one by just 200 meters, which I think is in the Alps as well, from memory.
100%. Someone got a nudge then. Just
Let's start in a slightly more complicated area so we could do a bit more tunneling, please.
No, it's another one of these projects with wild statistics. I think there was a section in the video I watched about it where they just talking about the ventilation shafts. They have to go straight up for, smoke to evacuate out.
Yeah.
It's taller than that, the building in Shanghai that looks like the bottle opener, like the tallest building in there, just in the ventilation shaft. Pretty incredible stuff. I think the thing that fascinated me the most was the model of building it. It might be a normal thing in Europe, but I've never heard of a job where you've got two governments contributing to a portion of the work. I don't know. You're over there now. Is that the usual state of play that in the Eurozone, their governments are kicking in for this sort of work?
I think we've when we talked about previous projects like Rail Baltica and stuff, in those projects, it's not uncommon. Like things like the Channel Tunnel and all sorts of things were funded in a somewhat similar way. But I think every mega project that we've looked at, talked about, or worked with on the AFEX side, there's always the like politics of mega projects, which are hard enough when you just have one country involved. Once you stick multiple and then like maybe the European Union on top, is a whole nother level.
A bit of Italian-French rivalry to in the video, all the big players were there. It was like Eiffage, Vinci on the French side, WeBuild on the Italian side. Pretty impressive that they're, how far into it they are and what they've completed. But yeah, you'd probably be a bit disappointed by, I think the French decision around like the delay is technically around connecting into Lyon. I think they're running to Dijon and they're looking at how they're actually going to connect it to Lyon. But having taken that train route before from Lyon up into the ski valleys, I couldn't imagine taking it all the way across to Turin. So 2 hours to make that journey is pretty good for a tourism perspective.
The current route, I've never been through this specific route, but I was shocked by the impact that this project could have. The current crossing, like they have the 30-degree gradient gets to like 1,500 or 1,600 meters in vertical elevation that they have to climb. The new route effectively reduces the gradients by half and lowers the crossing height to like 750 meters total. It is expected to carry 40 million tons of goods each year. Currently in this route, which was largely trafficked by trucks, there are 3 million heavy vehicles that cross that crossing every year. And so this has the ability to move a whole bunch of that over to rail. It's expected to reduce, I think, carbon emissions by like 3 million tons annually. It's kind of like you can see why the EU has to kind of step in to contribute. There's also this weird thing where there's like this super expensive tunnel in the middle. Then there's like a French stretch. There's an Italian stretch, but there's like EU-wide benefits.
It's part of the overall footprint, like this project to connect. I think in the video I saw Hungary to Poland, like in rail network, which they can already do it over the mountain, but it saves a couple of hours on that trip. So it sits in the context of all of these like rail focused trade network things that are being built around the world. There's like a whole bunch of ones that Russia are trying to connect down to the Middle East, and then you've got like China trying to connect across to Eastern Europe, and then Europe's trying to do this like global rail network. It's by far the like most efficient way to transport goods. But yeah, when you get individual projects that have this kind of, there's especially when you add like the Alps in the middle of it, there's some interesting engineering challenges. So yeah, super interesting project. Also, that newsletter is well worth a read for anyone that hasn't. Head to the Offsite Substack page. Jumping onto like the second topic, Sam, we were talking the other day about this recent news where Roberts Co., which is an Australian commercial and large builder, have put their Victorian operations into voluntary administration.
and halted 8, I think, major projects worth billions of dollars, including, I think, Australia's largest automated warehouse facility for Amazon. And this comes just 3 years after the company effectively rescued a previous builder called ProBuild, who went into administration and took over bought out a bunch of their projects. Just the last few weeks, Roberts Co announced accumulated losses of approximately 60 million in its Victorian operations, and forced work to stop across a bunch of those projects. The collapse not only affects the current developments, but a whole bunch of completed projects and their warranties and stuff in limbo. What was interesting to me is I immediately had like connections in my head to the semi-recent collapse of ISG in the UK, who was did similar types of projects. They were the UK's 6th largest contractor. They had a lot more projects, 69 government projects and like 2,000 plus jobs. And that a bunch of their jobs have increasingly recently been taken over by other contractors. I know Mason and others have picked up their projects. It touches on a whole bunch of, I guess, realities of the industry of construction around, well, at a starting point, the idea that it just takes 1 or 2 bad projects to totally blow up the good work of many prior ones. I don't know if this is something we've all probably experienced. If you had that kind of like, at a project or a company that you worked on before, there's that one project that seems to like unwind all of the work and all of the success of years or many projects.
Yeah, I actually started my career with a company out of South Australia called York Civil, and they were probably pretty successful builder, reputationally out of the state, probably, were probably the most renowned, still, I guess, family-owned company in that tier 2, tier 3 space, but were JVing on big projects. They delivered as a JV partner, the first section of the the second section after the Superway, but it was South Road upgrade with CBB. And yeah, they were going through a sort of expansion, and they, I think you do this thing as a company, you sort of have to buy your way in, or you got to take your punches for the first few projects that you move into a new region. And it took there was some big projects over on the East Coast, and one I was working for in Western Australia, but this sort of combination of a few bad jobs moving into bigger projects, and 25, 30 years of building up this very reputation in a business, and they quickly spiraled into administration. So it can happen really quick. It's I'm sure at the time, they always say like past performance is not a measure of what's going to happen in the future, but you're tendering all these jobs, you're probably thinking, maybe we're going to lose a little bit here, or it's going to get us reputation. You're probably not considering in that moment the potentially sinking the company.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like it's a effectively like low capitalized or capital light business model, where you might deliver $100 or $200 million project, but you don't have $200 million of assets or anything. You're delivering a service where you're performing work and paying a bunch of costs to make what in the industry, if you look historically, are really very low margins. I think if you looked across a bunch of different markets, the stats are that the net profit margins sit somewhere between 2 and 10%. And maybe on top of that, when you're pricing those projects, you're sticking what some would put somewhere between a 5 and 15% contingency on that project. But you basically end up in a spot where, as a business, you're taking on all this risk. You're ultimately trying to make some small margin on there. And especially if you go into a spot where you're trying to expand the business, you put yourself into a somewhat precarious position where if you're both in that expansion, taking on more risk, and you're stretching yourself kind of like financially to do that.
Yeah.
It takes 1 or 2 things that, if you have a 5 or 10% problem on a project, well, that's all of your margin and probably most of or all of your contingency. And then it just adds on top of like, well, then you start getting into disputes. Then there's delayed payment, and there's no like big balance sheet of assets to like kind of wear through that.
The potential to get gains on your project, like they come 1 in 10 compared to the amount of things you can do your ass on. Like you're just constantly in the way of things that can cause you cost overrun, and they're just the opportunities to gain, the money back just disappear. And the further you go down that hole, they become fewer and fewer available because, you're trying to squeeze time, you're cutting corners, like you're trying to do everything to make up this ground that you can never make up. Like you're never going to make 40% on a project like these, massive projects. They're never going to make it, but you could you
can lose it.
You can lose 40%.
Easy.
And it makes me think about like having worked in Victoria, the this type of contracting that they do there through the government, through the major road projects. They've got panel work, and there's sort of like this target cost, and pretty much you're in this position as a contractor that you're guaranteed you're going to get an amount of margin between whatever it is, 2 and 12-14%. But hey, that's pretty good when considering
if you take off the table that you could lose 40%, it opens up a whole bunch of other options for the like we've talked a lot previously about local contractors being bought by international contractors in a lot of markets. And when you overlay this idea, it makes a lot of sense why the international conglomerates have all of this leverage, because they've got the broader business that they've diversified. They often have other parts of the business, like an energy business or they own roads or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when you get into that spot, they've got the balance sheet to wear through. It's the loss 40% on a project goes from a bad year, instead of being like a company ending issue, it just goes to like a bad year.
Yeah, well, you look at John Holland just released, I think, whatever it was, their quarterly, or released their earnings for the last year, and they dropped 60 million. They made 180 last year, but so they had, a bit over a 200 million swing. Yeah. Like a lot of companies, you're gone. That'll sink you. And you're in administration well before that. So what do you think, though, sort of following that? Do you think it's a good state of affairs that this is the position it's going down? You've got a Roberts Go that's, folding up in an area of the state, less competition, maybe someone comes in and, buys another level of their work. Like, is that a good overall result for just looking at, Victoria?
I don't think it's a good overall result. I don't think anyone would argue it's a good overall result. I think there'd be a fucking shitload of argument on what the solution is, because I think there's like pie in the sky of like somehow people could price risk appropriately and know what the risks they're taking, and or there's better there'll be people talking about collaborative contracting models, but like practically I just don't see how any of that changes.
It's probably likely in this event it's all tied back to the bad debt that they brought in for taking over ProBuild's work, which was a big part of the coronavirus and the pandemic and the massive escalation in costs. Like, people obviously still feeling that. Pretty scary to see. They have 500 odd employees.
I think it goes a long way to describing why the industry and construction, why the culture in the construction industry is the way that it is. Like, people always smash the construction industry of like, they're slow to adopt technology. They're like Luddites. They're like laggards in both adopting digital and their productivity.
Yeah.
But if you look inside the business, maybe they're making 5 or 6% if they're lucky. Is the best use of our time and our energy to try and squeeze that up to 7%, or are we better off trying to stop the company ending project, like distressed project that could kill the company? And I think that the overwhelming answer is like, can we avoid or stop at any point in time across our portfolio of projects, we could be sitting on the like ticking time bomb that could kill the company. And so the risk adverseness is not like, I don't think a cultural thing. I think it's like a factor of the structure of the business that we as the construction industry are in. I don't think it's the people, it's the business.
You see those curves where it talks about like how much you can impact the outcome of a project the further you go along. Like the most impact you can have is before you've actually signed up to that job. And it's like, do we want to take this job? I think there was a period there where winning jobs was great. It was just like, we win a job, that's great. It's always a great result. And nowadays, just the way the risk gets handed down from owners, clients, the expectation on the private industry to carry that through, especially these big companies, like they have the ability to do it. Scary, you want some pretty good players in the room vetting these contracts, vetting the scope, negotiating the risk transfer, who owns what, because, 7-year contract, you got to look ahead and you've got to be predicting all these things.
Yeah, 100%. I think just looking like selfishly at it from a software vendor perspective, and this is like applicable to not only like other people in the industry, but even like within our team, people will go, oh, well, this project, it's saving an engineer 6 hours a week or 10, whatever it is. Like everyone's like, oh, this is such a great win. But if you zoom out and you put yourself in the contractor's shoes, like, cool, save that engineer 7 hours. I'm just trying to stop the like project that might end the company that we've had for 100 years rolling.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. And so I think there's a big reality check for like what actually the job of running the construction company is compared to what maybe software vendors and technology vendors are selling.
100%. And definitely for guys like me that spend my whole career just out on site, you get the tunnel vision about what's important. You're like, oh, we're going to do this on a project. But it's there's only so much you can do with it once it lands in your lap.
Yeah, 100%. All right, jumping to the last topic before we get totally squeezed out of time. So for setting up, a federal judge in the US has ordered Flatiron, which is a large construction contractor in North America, to pay AECOM $14 and a bit million in legal costs following a $5 million verdict in a Colorado highway dispute project. The dispute stemmed from this C470 Express Lane project, which was about a $200 million design build contract awarded in 2016. The dispute between the two, AECOM, as the designer, basically made a claim on Flatiron for payment of out-of-scope design services, so a variation to the design scope, which then went into a 5-year legal battle that culminated in a $5 million verdict in their favor. And then the court ordered for $14.2 million in legal costs, split between $8 million for attorney fees. So we spent $8 million on top of a $5 million claim, and then another $5.9 million for expert witnesses, which I think draws a really clear line to this like disproportionate expense and cost on the construction industry of resolving construction disputes. Probably similar to the last topic, Sam. You've probably seen a bunch of these in your time as well. Does it ring any bells of deja vu?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think everyone does. Congratulations to the lawyers; they did pretty well, didn't they?
They made more money than the contractor. Like, because if you take, it's a $200 million scope, which means if you take the average margin, they might have made maybe 10 million if they were lucky out of there. They're claiming they've lost 5 on this design thing, so they've probably made less than 5 million out of the project, and then the lawyers have smacked in 8 million and then $6 million for expert witnesses. So I know which business I'd rather be in.
I mean, how expert can these guys be if it costs you 5 million to get that sort of outcome? It's pretty bad. But to be honest, I having been on mostly the builder side of this sort of thing, and really just helping compile this sort of claim ends up getting stacked up on most projects these days. Not to this sort of scale, but there's some sort of dispute that gets in there. Good on the designers for getting a win. I'm sure there's some executives at some design houses out there going, finally, we got one. Because to be honest, when you look at the numbers, what was it? There was like a 5 million suit and they countered with something like 200 like Flatiron came back at it and for like 250 million in damages, like something ridiculous.
I was, the thing that stood out to me, which reminded me of, I guess, myself in some salt, like in my earlier days, being salty with a bad outcome. They had this claim for additional design services. Flatiron, in response, did this like countersuit, as you said. They then rode this out for 5 years, arguing the toss on this. And then their claim back to them was in non-technical language, basically, but AECOM did a shit design. Was the like counter argument that they then like dug their heels in and like rode it out for 5 years, only to come up with the L.
It's pretty sad. Like because starting from the number it did, that it gets to this 5 years down the track, like nobody wants this. Why are we going down this path constantly now? It just feels like it's become the price of doing business instead of, let's get good designers, like let's come up with good scope, like who's carrying the right level of risk. Like these are the conversations that aren't getting had. You've got you've got bad design coming out because you've got poorly formed teams that get no time to build it because you've got governments that are trying to push some project, and then they give some shitty design to a contractor who at the start says, yeah, sweet, I can build that, I want this job, I'm happy, and then they get into it and they've done their ass and they're like, fuck, like, yep. I can't carry this cost. So, that design was shit, which I was happy with.
Just go after it. They've probably got like equal number of cases with the subcontractors, with the client. It's like, what's the saying? This might be an Australian saying, but it's like when this shit hits the fan, everyone gets splattered.
Yeah. It's very visual, isn't it?
You get it.
Yeah, but no, I mean, it is like that. And meanwhile, like the developer, the owner, who's really like, they're the cause of it all. They built this thing and like they're generally involved to some degree. They're clean. They're absolutely clean. They've stepped away. Their contracts are airtight. So they just let the kids play it out like this, and this is the result.
It almost like calls back to the prior conversation, right? Like if you're the software vendor or whatever you're trying to sell to a construction industry, your 4 hours a week you save the team, or the 6 hours in writing a report. I think like on the list of things that they care about, right at the top is like not having the company ending project. Probably somewhere beneath that is avoiding the giant L on a dispute with one of our partners delivering this project. And then like right down is like, can I save this fixed cost engineer, supervisor, superintendent a couple of hours?
And I think the lawsuit's number one for the design house. Go in there, like, they don't care. Like, yes, get a design out, have a happy client, reputationally great, don't get sued by the builder. It's funny, we always, like, engineers joke about all the disclaimers that get attached to the design reports that come out, and like every piece of information that comes out. These poor designers, like, it's okay, just tell me, give me a call, let me know.
Yeah, give me an answer. If it goes wrong,
in 2 years' time, I'm pulling that out of my diary. So you're going to see it on an affidavit that's coming over to your lawyers.
Yeah, I think it all starts from this industry that is trying to be a service industry that is usually like kind of known or relatively fixed margin. If you think about most other like service industries, it's like, I'll do this service and I get some margin. And construction has this added like, but by the way, as part of like getting that service margin, you take on the risk of the entire project.
Yeah.
Like it's like a weird, they get really not any of the upside of it, and for some period of time carry all of the downside.
It's incredible. Like, what other, it only gets through because the numbers are so high, but what other industry carries that much risk? Like, you're not getting a tradie out to your house and he's not carrying that risk, and he's getting 30%. He's not getting 6% for the work he does. And, if things go wrong, he's still getting paid. But in construction, if things go wrong, you don't get paid. You don't even put your hand out for more most of the time. That's the price of that's the price of business. That's the industry.
I think people conflate it with like the supply of a good. So, if I bought something from, I don't know, you're a manufacturer of cars. If I buy a car, I've got the fixed price and you take the risk of like all the costs to get me that thing at that price. I think some people would say like, we're not in the business of construction. We give people these like assets, whether it's a bridge or a road. I just don't think that's true. I think it's a service industry. You're building the thing that the person that's asking you to build it has designed. You're not in control of the good that you're delivering. If I'm selling you a car, I'm totally in control of exactly how I'm going to build it, what I'm going to build, what's going to be in it, what the price of it is, car. And then you could choose to buy that thing or not. Yeah, the construction industry is like, I want this thing that looks exactly like this thing. Maybe I'll ask you to design a few bits around the edges, but like ultimately it's this bridge in this location, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Can you go and make that a reality? And it's a service industry, but it's a service industry that carries this like, at one point in the life of this company is going to be a fuck up that could end the company.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Especially when you're down thinking about, when you're losing money on a project, and it's the worst feeling, but you're like, I'm spending money to build a money-making asset for this person who refuses to pay me, and they own it at the end. Like, I'm paying for them to have this thing. It's like, why am I here? I just paid money to give you this thing.
Yeah, and the people on the project blame the people that tendered the project, but the people that tendered the project have got an impossible situation as well, which is like the unknown unknowns, and you've got a clock to like predict the future, do it really, really quickly, and then make all these assumptions, and we'll just sign you up to them being true. And then stick your best, like, then guess contingency that you might need for all the unknown unknowns that could kill you. It's like everyone has it's the short end of the stick for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think I'm a firm believer, like, it all comes back to the risk. Like, it's like what we saw at Robsco, it's just the risk profile, who's assessing it, getting that right up front. Because, the contractor's got to have some skin, but, when they're paying to go there and build something for someone else, that just doesn't feel right, doesn't pass the pub test.
No, yeah, they just and no one knows whether it's not like it's. I think there's maybe some elements and bad actors of like hide the cheese of where the risk is, like in the documents. But on the whole, I think people just don't know where the risk is. It's like unknown. It's unknown unknowns. There's a bunch of they just jam all the things they can think of in a bunch of documents, and then be like, hey. We don't really know what's in these documents, but it's these lot of documents make me feel really good about this project. And then can you take this and price it, please? And you might make a relatively low margin if you do well. All right. On that positive note, I think we're out of time, mate. Thank you very much for co-hosting. I think everyone will agree that was a really interesting conversation. We'll take a rain check on whether we do round 3 in a row. We'll see. Depends what the intro music was.
Copy. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Good fun.
Thanks, mate. Folks, thanks very much for listening. It's been a really interesting conversation. If you liked what we covered, please think about liking or subscribing to the podcast. Feel free to drop us a message if you've got ideas for topics of the future or guests. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.